Stay tuned to the end of this video for a word to our patrons. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Take FGO Wanted, the show where we let you know if you want to roll that 5-star. We just had our Valentine's, so now we have White Day. Simple as. It goes one then the other. Actually, usually there's a little bit more gap, but, you know, 3-week-long events. So, we're going to talk about a new limited SSR Archer, Takasugi Shinsaku. And are we sure this isn't a Gouda and or Gouda? Get ready for several of those jokes today. Anyway, this is Wanted. It's a show. It's a video series where we talk about real-life history, fate, lore, mechanics, and more. So stay tuned for all of that. Though obviously I don't like to curse myself by saying that the video will not be good. This one is going to be a little shorter and faster than some of the previous ones we've hit, and I am sure that given the state of the game, not as many of you are going to be as locked in as, say, I don't know, a hypothetical next batch of Wanteds, which will be much more anticipated. Also, sorry this one's a little late. We've all been playing loads of Monster Hunter lately. I kind of lost track of which day was which, and like I said, I expect this video's not super anticipated. If it was, let me know in the comments. Anyway, we're going to move into history. I'm also going to punch in a little closer to my microphone. I feel like I'm being a little quiet right now. Anyway, you may have guessed from previous appearances, because he's been in previous events before becoming a summonable character. Shinsaku is a major figure in the Meiji Restoration era. He was a samurai born in Choshu on the 27th of September, 1839. He was trained in some classical schools, but it did not fit in there, and when he was young, Shinsaku moved on to study at the Shokasanjuku Academy, a private academy run by one Yoshida Shoin, who was a famous philosopher and intellectual in Japan. The academy taught principles similar to the Sonojoi, that is, revere the emperor, repel the barbarians, ideals. It wasn't, like, codified as that movement yet, but he was teaching theories and doctrines along that way, and this conflicted with the nature of the Tokugawa shogunate. Shoin was caught up in the Ansei Purge after plotting assassination on a counselor to the Tokugawa, and was executed in 1859, and Shinsaku did visit his teacher in jail. This is also just, like, as a complete aside, it's funny how, like, there's a lot of, you know, purely ideological and ethical conflicts in the Meiji Restoration, which are also backed up with, and also the other side decided to assassinate that guy. You know, nobody just waits for their things to rattle out peacefully. Anyway, after the closure of the academy, he was away at the time. Shinsaku studied at a military academy in 1859, and despite the fact that Japan was still arguably isolationist, in 1862, he was sent to visit Shanghai to study the Qing Empire. This is important because he was a witness to the closing acts of the Taiping Rebellion, which kind of pushed his resolve to strengthen Japan against European imperialism. The Taiping Rebellion lasted quite a while, but by this stage, external European groups like the English were heavily supporting, in some cases almost puppeting, the Qing to keep King dynasty to almost, keep going over there. Now, like many leading Meiji thinkers, Shinsaku was known for his forward-thinking and new approaches. While obviously he was a samurai and he was very focused on the idea of, nationalism and strong loyalty to Japan and, to the emperor and kind of like old school structures, he also was a little looser than you'd think with some of the rules. While previous doctrine, previous laws even said only samurai could carry weapons, Shinsaku was a firm believer in an armed militia, shotai as it became to be called, and his own forces that he raised were only about half samurai. He took volunteers from farmers, day laborers, sumo wrestlers, even some Buddhist priests got involved. So he was open to, expanding the pool of possible recruits. Shinsaku eventually founded a militia unit under his direct command, the Kiheitai, which is another name that comes up a lot in the Fate version. His unit was known for its discipline, and specifically Shinsaku eventually adopted Western-style training and arms, turning it into a rifle unit, the original being about 300 men strong. So, again, talking about how, while very predisposed towards Japanese identity and a kind of, making sure Japan was strong enough to not be bowled over by imperial forces, also absolutely was like, and the way we do this is by adapting Western weapons. The Kiheitai was involved in many battles in Choshu and eventually in the Boshin War, which kind of kicked off the Restoration, before being disbanded in 1868. During these battles, the Kiheitai often showed the superiority of modern military tactics over old-school samurai units. They didn't have the strength to compete with Western forces just because of the sheer volume of them, but this encouraged Shinsaku to continue training in technological advancement. He saw that alone, even his small units could not best the massive armies that, the Western powers could field, but also proved that those powers were stronger than Japan because they were defeating guys who were using classical samurai ranks. Now, the Kiheitai wasn't without its own issues. They were involved in a lot of internal conflicts as well as external. One anecdote that is fairly notable is that about 2 months after its formal creation, Shinsaku was dismissed after an incident at Kyohoji Temple, where 2 people died in a conflict between a couple of different armed units from Choshu. They had a senior inspecting officer who, in the Kiheitai, was forced to commit seppuku, and Shinsaku basically narrowly avoided this responsibility and had to, skip town. And in fact, Shinsaku had to adopt a lot of aliases and often go into hiding to avoid prosecution by the Tokugawa government and occasionally the Choshu government. But despite the fact that they kept kicking him out, they kept bringing him back. At only age 25, Shinsaku was made director of military affairs in Choshu and was placed in charge of diplomacy with the Western powers, as there had been some incidents where Choshu fired upon Western ships. And as you know, if you fire at boats owned by a Western civilization, they dislike this, so there was some retaliation. But because of his familiarity with their tactics and having actually been outside of Japan, Shinsaku was selected for these kinds of diplomatic overtures as well. And his efforts allowed Choshu to become almost self-sufficient militarily. They were successful in the long run against Bakufu forces, but sadly Shinsaku would not live to see their ultimate success. He died of tuberculosis on the 17th of May, 1867. He was buried at Mount Kiyomizu in Yoshida, which was near a Kiheitai camp, and his comrades eventually raised the fund to build a hermitage next to his gravesite. The gravesite has become a National Historical Site in 1934. Now, despite his relatively short career, he was still only in his late 20s when he died, Shinsaku is a fairly popular character in culture. He appears as a character in a lot of manga and video games that involve this historical period. Not just Fate, but several stories get in there. To talk about lore, the Fate stuff is all pretty straightforward. His appearance in Fate mostly follows that real-life history I have recounted, with occasionally a couple of different anecdotes taking a focus based on, the being a little more culturally in tuned there. The main thing I want to say is that the White Day event we are experiencing right now is not his first appearance. Shinsaku is one of those rare characters who has escaped NPC jail. He was featured originally in the Guda Close Call event a couple of years ago now. Sorry, I had to do math between JP-EN and EN to EN conversions. But yes, he was a major character in that event, along with several other guys who are still in NPC jail. But obviously, I think they thought he was iconic and memorable enough to bring back. Now, this event is important because it is influential on the playable version, because his fighting style in FGO takes cues from that event. The large Arahabaki he built comes back as prototypes that are seen in some of his fighting animations, and some of his other, choices of style involving sword, shamisen, and even Molotov cocktails is kind of influenced by the stuff seen in that event. So if you did miss the event, you might lack context for some of his interactions, but knowing FGO, they'll probably, in the White Day event, have an opportunity to, remember him or maybe get a little extra exposition. They're usually pretty good about that. Haven't started the event myself. I've got to do this video, and then I've got to go do more Monster Hunter. But since he was originally a Guda character, we can expect to maybe see him cameo in future Gudas. There is a new full-blown titled Guda event later this year. I don't know if he's going to show back up exactly, but he is part of the Guda continuity, so he will keep coming back, kind of forming another guy in the, group with Ryoma and Izo from being from the early kind of Meiji period. So then, let us talk about mechanics. Takasugi is an archer, despite the fact that his fighting style being more rider-like. They do make a comment about this. He has higher attack, lower HP. Kind of fits, He has that old weak constitution tuberculosis problem. He is QQA with solid hits and NP gain. 4 hits all around, 0.57. Pretty normal stuff. Could probably be a little higher with his 1 arts card, but they have a couple of ways to work around that. His NP is incredibly simple. It's an AoE quick. It's got lots of hits. It's 8. The overcharge effect improves all card colors for 1 turn first and does a critical on self for 3 turns. The actual ratios are pretty normal. The critical one is obviously going to be the biggest because that lasts longer, so that's 30 to 50. But the card ups are 20 to 40% based on the overcharge level. But this is definitely a NP of a guy who's just kind of been floating around for like 2 or 3 years in the dev room with nowhere to go. It's not bad per se, but it's definitely like very simple and straightforward. No weird, unique buff you've never seen before. First skill is a 10 to 20% quick and busty for the squad, which is 3 turns, and then a 1-time 3 turns overcharge buff for the squad. This also means for him that you can be reasonably expected to, make sure you're hitting those higher percentages on the card color up and crit ups. His second skill is a targetable further 30 to 50% crit up for 3 turns, and is also -1 skilled cooldown on the target. Always a good effect to see. -1 turn of cooldowns. Can do some very silly stuff there. Does mean that if you use it on himself, that his critical buff becomes 100% for 3 turns if you can max out his overcharge. But obviously that's going to take you a little bit of work to set up. His last skill is a 1k to 3k guts, 1-time 3 turns, pretty normal stuff. A 20 to 30% battery, who could have guessed? And also gives him 20 to 30% attack up for 3 turns. Again, all very normal ratios, pretty typical stuff. His passives are he has magic resistance D for just a little bit of debuff resist. He has independent action B, which gives him crit up passively all the time, and also has a unique passive which gives him 6% more crit percent and 6% arts percent. So his total passive crit is like 14%, but it's spread throughout 2 skills. They are just additive. So you may have noticed from how quickly I ran through that, Takasugi's not really that flashy, but he will get the job done. And like, because we have future knowledge, obviously this is not going to be that appealing compared to like super major characters who are highly anticipated. Some of them have very unique niches coming up like literally at the end of this month and throughout the rest of the first half of this year. But I want to put a point in this. The only point of comparison for Archer 5-star AoE quicks is Seishonagon. Like, all of the others are 4 stars. A couple of them, just quicks period are welfares. So it's kind of a weird case where, like, he doesn't really need to be flashy. He does kind of the same thing that you want out of Sei, but from a different angle. She is a trait-type damage dealer. Her NP does extra damage versus the human attribute, and then she has give herself extra damage versus those with neutral alignment and shadow servants, which can be a little more chaotic, but there's multiple layers there. If you stitch the damages together, you can do a lot, though their actual applied skills are kind of similar. They both have kind of, I want to say, like a half support group, but Shinsaku should have the stats and hits to perform the classic double Scotty looping. He's got a pretty decent attack. He has a self battery for at least 30. He has a couple of traits and stuff, steroids, and it's 8 hits, so that should still trigger the over effect. I don't even know what we call it. I guess it is the over damage effect is why quick multiplies so high. Anyway, he has the bones you need to do that classic strategy. That's not really a hot new thing, but it is a thing he can probably do. Kind of lends to a point I made earlier, which is I feel like Shinsaku's kind of a character who's had his design just kind of locked in and they were looking for an event to put him in. But he's got an inherent crit potential for follow-up. The NP gives him 3 turns of that, and you can set up more. So it's not like he's useless. Like I said, there's not a lot of competition for archers in this color type if you're building quick comps. His self-steroid being first should cover a decent amount of sins, getting 20% on everything all the time, string together some, mighty chains. He has the guts to hold on through a long fight. He's got a little bit of team support because his, crit up, cooldown down is targetable, his red-green buff is team-wide, and he has a plus overcharge effect, which can be very handy for a lot of different things. So he can kind of act as off DPS, sweeping aside adds, creating opportunities for a focused DPS to take on a boss, possibly over multiple turns. He won't outdamage Sei when she's hitting her traits, but conversely, when her traits are off, he should do better because all of his attacks are just color and raw attack stat based. Short version of all that stuff I just said, he's not really new or flashy, even though, again, there's not a lot of competition for archers among this slot. But he should be consistent enough for normal farming. It's kind of a low skill floor but low skill ceiling type beat. You're not really going to fuck up using Takasugi Shinsaku, but that also means that he cannot do some of the crazier bullshit that other servants can do. You can already see me doing team comp suggestions here. Double or triple Scotty works, Otsukabe Hime works, any other budget quicks work. There's a whole slew of single target quick archers that can benefit from his aid, though again, none at 5-star. But his team buff is Buster too, so there's plenty of those. For craft essences, his self-battery is only 30%, so you can't go with a 50% CE unless you invest in append skills. If you're using a Scotty-type beat, it doesn't matter. You could go, straight up go to 100%, so you can use Black Grail or something similar for maximizing your NP damage. Otherwise, in general, I would say go for quick, NP, and crit focus. This is just an unscripted insert, but I want to say I'm, editing each chunk of the script as I record it, as I wrote it out, and it's just funny to me to like look at the amount of time it's taking me to get to this script compared to some others where you can clearly tell that this is a very simple, straightforward servant because doing all of the mechanics took me like 5 minutes, as opposed to, you know, I have 10 or 15-minute segments when servants are clearly designed to be like a hot, hip new thing. Anyway, the other stuff, as I like to call it. For mats, like I said, you can tell Shinsaku's been in the works for a while. He needs basically nothing new to ascend or even to skill. For his last ascension, he does take a fair amount of bullets, and the newest thing his skill needs are Oni Lantern Flames at 10 per. Those are from Lost Belt 5.5, so like, it shouldn't be too crazy. And for banners, he's got a decent selection. Obviously, Kiheitai have industry events being released on right now for White Day / Kiheitai Boys Collection. Expect regular reruns every White Day. He's also been on the Archer campaign in JP that's been running since the year began. They're doing weekly class-themed banners, so he's already had his run. And he's a limited SSR, so he'll be on all GSSR campaigns as well. And that's all we got. A short, sweet script. We're going back to Monhan. As a note, I added literally just today, before recording this, shout out to 2 years from now, since JP did Dante Alighieri for their current White Day. Expect that wanted to be about triple the size of this one. You will not get me to shut up about Dante Alighieri. So we're going to have fun with that. But for now, we're going to wrap this current wanted. So, if you happen to have, by some ungodly chance, seen this video to the end, consider hitting us with a like, leave your comments in the comments down below, join our Discord. We do have a dedicated roll thread under our FGO English chat, so that's cool. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel to get more of these videos. Like I said, I suspect the next couple of these will be a little more highly anticipated. And we got some previous ones you can check out as well. Make sure you're hitting the bell so you're always knowing when we're posting new videos or streaming. And yes, we do stream stuff. You should check those out. Consider supporting us with the channel memberships and hit us up on Patreon, which will include a little shout out to our patrons, right? Meow. Because this episode is brought to you by our wonderful patrons, included but not limited to Adam DeHarp, Blacklist OG, Call Me Zed, Carlos, Dragon, JDV9000, Chris Starlight, Legendary Boss Hunter, Rise of Kenji, Rogue Robin, Sharvor, some guy named Bob, and Varian the Crow. Thank you very much for your support, everybody, but especially our highest tier patrons. If you want to see us do more, consider supporting us on Patreon. Bye-bye, guys.